In our daily lives, and especially when dealing with markets, we all need to be guarding against a thing called frequency illusion. Now, the human brain has a lot of cognitive biases, whether we like it or not. I think just varies between individuals as to the extremity and the type of cognitive biases, but we all seem to have them. And one of these biases is frequency illusion. Now, frequency illusion can probably best be described as where you observe a phenomenon, possibly you've just recently heard of it, even though it's been around for quite some time, possibly, but you've just learned of it. It's of interest to you, and you quickly start to perceive it as being far more common or far more frequently occurring than what is actually the case in reality. And this is a very common bias that humans have for a lot of things. And it can spill over into property markets, into housing markets, and it can affect investment decisions possibly in the wrong way. Now, just to give you maybe a little example, a practical example of frequency illusion, I don't know how many of you have ever decided to buy a new car. And you start looking around and you see some friend's car which you really like, and you say, well, that's possibly the one I'm going to buy. And from then onwards, previously you never noticed that make of car really on the road in a big way. Now suddenly you notice those cars, it feels like they're everywhere, just because you focused on them now. Now that's possibly an example of frequency illusion, going from not noticing at all to possibly thinking they're everywhere, and the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Frequency illusion depends on three factors. Firstly, selective attention. Come back to the car example. Suddenly I'm focused on something. It's of interest to me. So suddenly that's what my attention zooms in on. That's what I notice. That's what my mind sees, and it filters out all the rest. So selective attention is a factor leading to frequency illusion. Confirmation bias is another one. We formulate a view often of how the world works, often not based on fact. And then we look for facts thereafter to confirm our bias or confirm our beliefs or views of the world. And so we're selective. We look for the right data or the right evidence, and we filter out stuff that doesn't confirm our view of the world. And then the third factor which contributes to frequency illusion is unreliable information or inaccurate information. And that's often the case where we just don't have data for something. So there's a perception, there's a anecdotal evidence, but it might be one or two people, and suddenly it becomes 100 people involved because we just don't have the accurate data. When you've got accurate information, it's more difficult for people, when presented with that information, to still be biased in terms of the frequency to which something occurs. So, and this is important. Now, at the moment, I think that one of the regions where there's something of a frequency illusion is the Western Cape housing market, which is the outperforming housing market, well, property market in general, should I say, in the country. Now, the Western Cape has benefited, but this is not the only reason for its market being driven. But it's benefited from a noticeable net inflow of more skilled households and more affluent households into that province from other regions such as KZN and Gauteng. People often in search of a better lifestyle, for which the Western Cape is perceived to be good, as well as a place where things work. And a lot of the councils in the Western Cape are perceived and have shown a track record of being better at service delivery and often of infrastructure upgrades and maintenance. So that's been a bit of a pull of the more skilled section of the population. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going. That doesn't mean that everybody's emptying out of Gauteng, out of Joburg, out of Pretoria, out of Durban, and heading towards the Western Cape. What it means is that the Western Cape is better relative to size at attracting a portion of the skilled labor force and the affluent labor force. It's also better at retaining what it has. So it's got I believe, a net inflow, whereas Gauteng and KZN and others often have a net outflow of the more skilled and higher income end of the household sector. That benefits the Western Cape in various ways. But where we've got carried away, now this semigration, as we call it, has become a very high profile occurrence. There's a lot of media hype around it. And to be fair, it exists. But there's not always accurate data to show just how many households are moving that way versus how many are moving the other way. And of course, when it comes to younger generations, young labor force entrants starting their careers, not having owned houses in places like Cape Town, there might be some movement the other way up to Joburg, where to the country's biggest economic hub for career purposes. But that's not often recorded because it's not a homeowner selling in one place and moving to another place, etc., etc. It's a new entrant to the labor market, a youngster who comes to Gauteng and then is a first-time buyer in the housing market. So there's a lot of inaccuracies in the data. There's a lot of hype around the semigration, especially to the Western Cape, although not only. And sometimes people can be forgiven for this frequency illusion, for perceiving it to be like everybody is going there. It's not the case. It can't be the case. Gauteng's population is double the size of the Western Cape, roughly, or somewhere thereabouts. And it's also growing significantly because there's migration into it from other places. It's not just emptying out. The other perception is that these semigrants that are moving into the Western Cape are a key, if not the key driver of its property market. Now, to be fair, they are a driver. Obviously, they come there and they look for houses in which to live, either to rent for a while or to buy. So they are a driver. But I think it's possibly gone too far sometimes where people perceive them to be the biggest driver. I don't see that as being possible. I think when you look around, when you take the whole of city of Cape Town, for instance, markets, Durbanville, Parow, Bellville, Mitchell's Plain, Khayelitsha, the whole bang shoot, including those small affluent ones on the edge of the city, or the Stellenbosches, the Winelands towns and so on, which are smaller but prime markets. I think that what you see overall is that the overwhelming majority of people buying and selling properties are locals that have lived there for quite some time. They sell maybe because there's a divorce, there's a family split. You now need two smaller houses instead of one big house, and they go off and buy. There's first-time buyers entering that market in noticeable quantities, noticeable numbers. People sell to downscale due to financial pressure or for life stage. Others sell to upgrade to a better house or to relocate somewhere else because of traffic congestion, etc., etc. There's a whole lot of reasons why locals buy and sell property. And I still believe that that is the overwhelming majority of residents in a place like the city of Cape Town, as well as many of the big towns in the Western Cape, for the Western Cape overall. But it goes further. There's this perception that there's a huge amount of investor demand, buy-to-let demand, because of this hype around the Western Cape and this big confidence, investor confidence in the Western Cape. To the extent, and I think this is where sometimes frequency illusion also comes about, where it's perceived that investors, buy-to-let investors, and possibly even speculators are driving that market. Again, I think that they are very much a minority. The first thing to look at is house price growth. I don't think the Western Cape as a whole, maybe there are little areas or developments that are in some sort of bubbly house price growth, double digits and growing in the extreme and sucking in a lot of speculators and investors. But for the region as a whole, I don't think that's the case. And let's pull out some figures. Firstly, 7.7% house price growth according to Stats SA for the Western Cape. That beats 3.5% for the country as a whole, but 7.7 is not boom. Boom times were back around 2004, 2005 when we had above 30% national house price growth. That was a boom and probably a housing bubble. 7.7 is hardly shooting the lights out. It's hardly a speculator's paradise for the region as a whole when interest rates, when prime rate is at 11.75, higher than the house price growth rate. You can't buy houses on average and flip them quickly and make massive capital gains. That's not easy. So it doesn't look too bubbly from a simple measure like house price growth to me. It doesn't look like an extremely strong market. It's just outperforming the weak national average. That's it, because it's got something that benefits it mildly, i.e. net semigrant inflows, I believe. And then it's got all the normal buying as well. But secondly, if we look at investor demand versus primary residential demand, what do we find? Well, as I say, there's this perception, and some have even perceived that the bulk of buying is investor demand and not primary residential demand. I can't see that if you take the Western Cape as a whole. The FNB estate agent survey for the city of Cape Town is a good one to look at. Normal old suburban markets and township markets across the city of Cape Town, randomly selected, and the estimate by agents, the aggregated estimate is that primary residential demand, in other words, buying to live in the house you buy, 75%, the overwhelming majority. Then a portion buying for the primary residence of a relative, be it a child, an elderly parent, maybe a sibling or so, 6%. Add those together and primary residential is 81%. Holiday demand, there is some along the coast that's estimated at 6% in the city of Cape Town coastline. And then buy-to-let/investor demand, 14%. That's not the overwhelming majority. That's not even close. Now, it does reflect greater investor confidence in the Western Cape than the rest of the country. The national average buy-to-let estimate is 8%. The Gauteng Metro's estimate is 5%. So 5 versus 14, I think that's a reflection of greater investor confidence in the city of Cape Town as opposed to the big Gauteng metros. That can be said. I think that's true. But let's not get carried away. Investor demand is not the key driver of the market. The key driver of the market is people going about their normal daily and yearly lives looking for a house to live in. Primary residential demand, first-time buyers, divorcees moving into new residence, upgrading, downgrading, relocating for work. That's the big demand. I sense that there might just be this incidence of this very well-documented frequency illusion in this market, an over-perception of how extreme the semigration inflows are, an over-perception of how to what extent that is driving the market as a single factor, and possibly an over-perception of how much investor demand there is. Maybe in certain developments, maybe in certain nodes, there might be a very high level of investor demands, but when we're talking for the region as a whole, I don't see it as extreme, and I'm not sure we can call it bubbly or even an extreme boom or anything of the sort. It's merely moderately outperforming the rest of the country's rather flat market.